With the commencement of the offseason just around the corner in a week, I wanted to make a comprehensive video detailing some of the players that caught my eye on the offseason and thought highly of throughout the PG season. This isn't necessarily an open endorsement of each player, just highlighting some players that I found interesting or high performing across the 2021 amateur season, or just solo queue prospects that are definitely worth keeping an eye out for. The midseason swap of top jungle for 100x was massive for the squad, alongside tremendous improvement from both Instinct and Busio. While Gamsu is definitely worth talking about, he's not on the list since he's had years of a head start on the other top lane prospects. With that being said, he's probably the best overall top laner outside of Academy. His understanding of how to play lane and mid game is way superior relative to the other top laners. However, the player I definitely want to focus on for the squad who joined 100 Academy towards the terminal of the last split is Chad Jungle. While Gamsu did improve throughout the split, it was definitely both Busio, who ended up getting signed to 100 Academy proper, and Chad Jungle, who were the biggest improvers across the summer split. Coming in as mostly a Graves one trick, Chad was hands down one of the best Viego players in summer, which was essential as the pick was absolutely broken. In addition, he was solid on picks like Nocturne, Volibear, Kha'Zix, and Xin. He was good on 100x, but with Ryoma smurfing on 100 Academy, he really unleashed his potential. If Kenvi gets an LCS offer, I could see him sticking around on 100 Academy for longer. Truthfully, almost any player from 100x's roster could be on this list, and Instinct definitely deserves a spot here too, since his skill leveled up significantly across the split. But in my eyes, it's Chad joining 100x and gradually improving that made 100x and later 100 Academy secure the PG summer win. Captain Shrimps was a player I was underwhelmed with throughout the spring in Scouting Grounds 2020, but gradually, as his picks shaped into meta, Shrimps became a premier mid laner in summer. LeBlanc, Twisted Fate, and Xerath comprise his more standard pool, and while usually people tend to taper off after their ideal pool comes in and out of meta as time goes on, DNA was an unfortunate example of this after spring. It's really up to Shrimps to once again grab the opportunity to improve before his champions fall out of meta. Fizz, Twisted Fate, Xerath, LeBlanc, Rumble, and Syndra have all looked relatively good for Shrimps in the past, but it's on him to continue on his success and solid gameplay on other champions to be in contention for Academy spots. A bit of an interjection here, I wrote this script before Scouting Grounds, but on the subject of C9AM, Wixie and Breezy definitely deserve a spot on this list. Wixie has a variety of champions he's great at, his Aphelios is really good and he's one of the best in the region outside of Academy. Ezreal, Jinx, Draven, Xayah, and back when she was meta, Wixie was one of the best Senna players in Amateur. Breezy is one of the best Rakan players likewise, with a great Thresh, Leona, Karma, and Yuumi, etc. Breezy is a rare example of a support who is actually relatively well-rounded in his pool, and that is pretty uncommon in Amateur. Despite not competing in Summer, both Meech and Trevor Roy should be sought after for AD carry and support respectively for 2022. Meech is one of the best, if not the best Aphelios players outside of Academy, and no one even comes close aside from maybe Arrow or Wixie. He needs a strong support who is able to strike a careful balance between playing towards bottom lane and influencing the rest of the map. Trevor has been his longtime support and the best example I can think of the kind of player he needs to thrive. Trevor did a good job of striking his solo laners at ideal times and utilized a pretty underrated concept in League, which were level 1 support roams to strike extremely volatile lanes when it's improbable to impossible to control bottom lane wave level 1 and play for level 2. Definitely one of the best amateur plays of all time in my opinion was his level 1 bush camp top lane in Maryville University versus Dignitas Mirage, where he ganks chippies his Nocturne versus Dragoon's Darius and helps snowball the Darius against what is usually a pretty hard matchup for the Darius. Together, they comprised one of the best bottom lanes in 2021 spring throughout the entire PG tournament, even giving a great performance against King and Isles from Cloud9 Academy. Another AD carry to watch out for is Array, who came into Amateur nearly completely green in spring. Despite this fact, for a decent portion of the season, the support role for him has been a game of musical chairs. Throughout the 2021 Proving Ground season, he's played with a total of 4 supports: G-Bunny, Julian, Modern, and Winter. G-Bunny was one of the strongest supports Array would work with, and he demonstrated his strong laning phase mechanics which would help compensate for Array's developing skills in a competitive environment. But over time he had to step down due to health concerns. Julian may have had a better mind for the map, although being a recent swap from middle lane, his support mechanics were weaker than G-Bunny, and the early game lane suffered as a result. Modern only played with Array for a handful of games and isn't really worth substantiating on, and while Winter is definitely by no means a bad support in lane, Array definitely had to step up and get better when Resolve had a mid-season slump in summer. It's the variety of adversity that Array had to face that helped catalyze his development. Towards the end of the 2021 season, Array swapped supports again and started laning with Trevor Roy, and Array, combined with Trevor's strong laning and a solid vision of the map, created the strongest bottom lane in Collegiate by far. As far as top laners go, NA is in a bit of a sorry state. There just aren't enough new players with a good understanding of the lane outside of Academy. The one player that does give me a good amount of hope at this point was TSM Amateur's Eclipse. His champion pool is actually extremely expansive relative to the rest of the prospects, and this can somewhat be attributed to him playing mid lane extensively in the past. His mechanics are solid, but the biggest hurdle he has to cross is taming his aggression as it relates to activity on the map, and from what I can infer just from the games I've watched, maybe even articulating the resources he needs from his jungler and when he needs them. The wildcard red core of Bradley, Winston, and even Daption were a solid group of players to comprise an amateur team with, and that's not to say that Brandini or Arrow were anything less than exceptional, just that I wanted to focus on the more novice players in the squad. Bradley and Winston were the best mid-jungle and amateur by a mile, and likely one of the best 2v2s in the entire PG event, obviously behind TL and 100 Thieves, but Bradley's laning phase was extremely impressive for a novice player, and his champion pool was absurdly diverse too. Renekton, Akali, Ryze, Azir, Irelia, Twisted Fate, Silas, Jace, Lucian, Viego, Gwen, I literally couldn't stop. Bradley was hands down in my mind the most flexible player throughout the summer season, and Wildcard Red nearly defeated 100 Academy relatively early in the bracket before slipping up in games 2 and 3. Winston was also a monster in the jungle, handedly outpathing each opponent he came up against until around the end. While his champion pool wasn't as diverse as Bradley's throughout the season, he certainly had less to prove coming off of a relatively solid performance on TSM Academy, where he was one of the most improved players across the Academy split. It's clear that Winston hasn't stagnated after being dropped out of Academy. He clearly shows a good ability to convert farm leads into tangible advantages on the map on the faster clearing junglers like Olaf, Hecarim, and Diana, while still being good on the more ganking based junglers of Xin Zhao and Lee Sin. I do think that there can sometimes be issues, however, on Winston when it comes to the lower mobility junglers that require more precision to set up plays in advanced, although that could equally be a team-wide issue, and likewise, Bradley can sometimes struggle in side lane when he is either equal or behind in strength to the enemy side laner, and likewise when he is able to be collapsed on by his team since they could be behind. Both of these things are likely to be more prevalent on an amateur level though. Daption is a good support, as I've mentioned in my last video, and he has definitely improved alongside Arrow. In spite of this though, he is a very emotional player, and while he has a good eye for the map and his laning has improved leaps and bounds, he's prone to tilting off the face of the earth, and while he is still great at ranged options, his engage play once again likely needs more refining, although he is definitely worth eyes in Academy. Supernova's 2021 was in summation the story of Strompest. There is one other player on SN I'll touch on in a few minutes, but overall the team would definitely not have functioned at all with nearly any other mid laner aside from Strompest. While his champion pool isn't the most breathtaking, it is concise enough to have a good idea of what to expect out of the player. He is clearly very competent on a variety of control mages and melee options like Silas, alongside having a good Lucian. LeBlanc, Irelia, even following in Bradley's footsteps and adopting a pocket Vayne. There are some champions that don't strike me as especially impressive though for Strompest, such as his Syndra, and even his Twisted Fate doesn't necessarily strike me as being in his style. Strompest needs to have the tools to either carry the game or directly support someone who can carry the game and in turn create his own agency like Seraphine. Despite being a strong champion, I would argue that for many mid laners that aren't used to his somewhat unique playstyle, Twisted Fate can be more difficult to execute, especially on the amateur level. Matty took his summer similar to spring. He shows a good degree of potential still yet, and was still the best Lilia throughout the circuit by far. He did demonstrate some new tricks as the meta evolved too. Trundle, Volibear, Xin Zhao, amongst others like Nocturne, were all solid picks for the player. To be blunt, while Matty has improved, he does lack a sort of je ne sais quoi, which I can most likely attribute to maybe having a lack of urgency, which is something a lot of junglers I see do lack. It can be often that it's necessary for Matty to create interaction early in a matchup, or to confront the enemy jungle, or to control a volatile lane. Maybe it's not necessarily being articulated by his laners, but it can be a routine occurrence that while off the infinite scaling junglers, or junglers with easy gank setup, that Matty loses control of the game. Don't get me wrong, Matty is still very promising and clearly has great PvE skills alongside solid teamfighting, but he does have clear weaknesses that do hold him back from being an exceptionally well-rounded player. In contrast to this, however, Resolve's Fnatic was once again an absolute monster in summer with an excellent idea on how to control volatility and create interaction early. Early game junglers like Lee Sin, Trundle, and Xin Zhao really allow Fnatic to shine, and they did come into meta full swing just in time for Resolve to hit a late season rally to push for a solid 7th to 8th PG finish and 2nd overall for Amateur and Proving Grounds. If you've seen my FlyQuest video, I don't really have much new to say, although Fnatic has clearly shown a good degree of progress. He is still obviously a clear tier above the other junglers surrounding him, aside from Chad Jungle and Winston, who I think he fits nicely alongside with. Him being exceptional on the ganking junglers is not to say that he's anywhere remotely bad on the farm-based options either, just that where he excels relative to his peers are his faster-paced options. His cooperation across the year with Support Winter, another player definitely worth discussing on this list, was exceptional for an amateur team, and together comprised one of, if not actually the best, jungle support 2v2s in amateur. Winter was a player who clearly showed a ton of progress in summer and really expanded his horizons and showed great performances on his more traditional picks like Rakan, Leona, Thresh, and Braum, alongside showing off his enchanters as the meta shifted towards the end of the season and the postseason on picks like Nami and Lulu. LeenK, despite not participating in summer, has been a jungler I've had my eye on for a while now, and out of all the junglers on this list, I definitely put forward the argument that he has the most expansive champion pool out of all of them. Fiddlesticks, Kayn, Karthus, Echo, all while having a equally competent champion pool of mainstays like Sejuani, Olaf, Kindred, and Graves. Honestly, while the lack of Jarvan 4 or Trundle is puzzling, there is no doubt in my mind that he can pick up these junglers if needed. Rovex was an underrated mid lane across the 2021 season, and while I don't think he's exceptional, I think with a jungler like LeenK, he's the mid laner that the jungler would favor, playing for the map and for priority to facilitate his jungler's invades. LeenK actively plays for enemy camps and hunts the enemy jungler on his more aggressive options, whereas on his farm-based options, he effectively utilizes his laner's priority to force his opponent out of the jungle to expedite his own scaling. LeenK is great at creating interaction on the enemy jungle, in contrast to a player like Fnatic, who often creates interaction around enemy lanes. He's a player to watch out for coming into spring for certain. Finally, there are two players I want to touch on briefly before I get into the last round of honorable mentions, which are players I just don't have enough to talk about, or I haven't seen enough of, or were just shy of making this list. First, Yuuji is a perennial talent in North America. He reminds me of Jojopyun in the regard that he's clearly adept at a multitude of roles. Jungle, support, mid lane, just to name a few. Unfortunately, and likely unfairly, he needs either a green card or a work visa, as he's from Mongolia. Relative to his competitive experience, which to my knowledge is 0 outside of his collegiate team, Yuuji has the most to offer, but that's unsurprising as he's from a much more competitive server, being from Mongolia and playing on the Chinese server. Finally, Sheiden is still the most promising solo queue jungler. It's honestly disappointing that a player can be so held back by his solo queue behavior like Sheiden, but it goes to show how emotional League of Legends can make people, to the point where a promising career is once again delayed due to the actions entirely unrelated to gameplay. He's a mechanical prodigy, has great pathing, a solid champion pool, but he is once again ineligible to play in Riot-sanctioned tournaments due to being behavior checked. He is once again confined to Tier 2 Amateur and solo queue for the time being. Just a few players I also have my eyes on in the offseason, as honorable mentions on this list, are Pocket Rhino, Firefire, Value, and Darkwings. All good players that have shown a lot of promise in spring, but either haven't appeared to have made considerable progress in the summer like Darkwings or Firefire, who himself had kind of a weak spring relative to his 2020 performance. Value is still a good candidate for Academy, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him there, but he didn't participate in any summer events, although his performance on the EU West ladder has been pretty strong. Rhino didn't have a fantastic PGA appearance, but otherwise had a great rest of the year and showed good progress, alongside strong support mechanics relative to the rest of the supports in North America, alongside improvements in how he played the map. Spyrax can also go here too, since Maryville has been kind of in and out of amateur, and likewise Spyrax has been in and out of the mid lane, with Getback arriving from Australia to take up the mid lane spot for Maryville. 3 last players I want to briefly mention, and then I'm done for real. Shochi, Radiance's former mid laner for 2021, is someone to keep your eye on in 2022 amateur, unless he somehow gets an academy shot. He's a fantastic melee-based mid laner who has been expanding his champion pool, and he's shown a lot of promise to me, just due to the rate of his improvement towards the terminal end of 2021, alongside actually having some fantastic performances on Radiance, especially the game against Wildcard.R. Likewise, Bluster1, who is Radiance's jungler, filled in for EGP towards the end of the PG season, and while the loss of Tomio caused EGP to completely collapse, I still think he played well considering his circumstances. And just like how Perry Jungle, another player I might as well throw in here as being really good and worth a lot of eyes, used to be a Kane one-trick on wildcard development under the name Ghostly Cat, Bluster likewise strikes me as a player who can also reach really high highs if he can follow up his success into the 2022 season and maybe expand his horizons past his comfort of Kindred and Kane, but I do see him taking actions to do so. And that's it for me. I haven't made a video for a long time since I was doing LCS in summer, and I'm in school right now finishing up my biology degree before I go back to LCS and then consider medical school, but I've had my eyes on the latter for a while now. I think NA has a good deal to be excited for next year if people pay attention to what at least I consider to be cataclysmic developments recently. And if the solo queue ladder was just taken a little bit more seriously, it probably wouldn't even be that bad of a region, considering what we have been having to contend with. Free Robbie Bob and Light Pulse, get these two on a decent amateur team that isn't falling apart next spring, alongside Bluster, Keetong, and Shochi. Each of these players deserved a lot better. And thank you for watching. And thanks to KingMe2 for the thumbnail, his link's in the description, and I'm glad that he's finally getting the attention he deserves.
Yeah. Now I got diamonds on my chain, you could call that Jason Jungle. Hit a bitch right in her neck, now all she can do is mumble. I just stole your data, now they calling me Prussian. I got a bad bitch named Anastasia, I think she's Russian.